I'm here with Calder Hannan, who is a YouTuber and a PhD student at Columbia, who's studying music theory with an emphasis on extreme and progressive metal. His project is Florid Ecstasis, and I'm excited to sort of dive into music theory and metal and a bunch of stuff like that. Calder, I start these conversations asking about people's coffee habits. Can you tell me if you drink coffee, or if there's another beverage that you hold sacred in your life?
I don't drink coffee. I'm an anomaly. Yeah,
Interesting.
uh I'm a fan of good old H2O, although I don't say no to a PBR
Interesting.
every now and again. Yeah, I have the trashiest beer taste, and I um yeah, I mostly drink water. I'm boring like that.
Interesting. You're like the second guest altogether who said that out of 40 or so.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
Very interesting. Okay. I mean, are you into water or do you just drink it because you have to?
I would say I'm maybe more enthusiastic about water than the average person. Um, yeah, I my like other part of my life, I compete in weightlifting, and I'm a coach at a gym. That's kind of my side
Interesting.
gig. So um maybe that has something to do with it. But yeah, I
Sparkling water or regular water?
no, I don't like spicy water. I just regular water. Probably the most unsatisfying answer could possibly give, but it's the truth, and I've sworn to tell nothing but the truth.
Well, when I came across your YouTube channel, I felt like an immediate kinship and like somebody else who gets the sort of music theoretical landscape. And so I don't understand your water preferences. I don't understand your lack of coffee, but now I know. Um, okay, so you're at Columbia, you're doing music theory, and I was super jealous when I realized that you were doing this because I just straight up didn't know that you could do that. When I was in school, I was under the impression you could do classical music or maybe do some jazz. When did you realize that you could do metal in an academic
uh
realm?
well, it's yeah, so I didn't even realize that you could do anything with music in an academic realm until uh after I finished my undergrad. Was I kind of got through the end of my undergrad. I wrote a an undergrad thesis about this stuff, and then I didn't really have anything lined up. I hung around in Charlottesville for another year. I was working at a restaurant, um, and I went to have lunch with my one of my advisors, one of my professors, and he's like, "Well, you should think about grad school." Um, and I was like, "You can go to grad school for music theory." Um, because like the place I went to, I went to the University of Virginia for undergrad, and the grad program there was only pretty much in composition. And I was like, I know I'm not like really trying to be a composer, I don't think. And I'm certainly not going into a performance program. Um, so yeah, it was kind of eye-opening to know that I could go into a music theory program. And yeah, I mean, it's not super common, but there are certainly several people who have kind of blazed this trail doing the metal stuff. Um, and like yeah, so there are even people, a few people ahead of me who were admitted to kind of higher profile grad programs based on their interest in metal. So Eric Smielek, who came out of McGill, and Olivia Lucas, who went to Harvard, and Stephen Hudson, who was at Northwestern. So I'm kind of just like following in their footsteps. And I should say there's always room for more of us, and it's if it's still something you're interested in, I think you'll find that programs are a lot more receptive to metal stuff than most people think.
Interesting. Okay. Well, maybe I'll be part of this group one day. I'm curious. So, in terms of like music theory, how would you map out the main sort of domains right now? Like, whether it's areas of interest for you or just like how you see the sort of music theory world right now.
um, That's a good question. I should also, sorry, I forgot about the Florida people. Jose Garza, Gregory McCandless, just in case, on the off chance anybody's listening. I'm sure I'm forgetting about more people, but there's, there's kind of a lot of this stuff, or a lot more of this stuff than people assume. Um, so your question is like about the different kind of areas of music theory,
Mhm.
stuff in my own research, my own interests and research. Um, I think I don't know, there's so much stuff. I think there was a time when there was this stereotype that was maybe well deserved, that music theory, if you're doing academic music theory, you're either doing Schenker, so doing, tonal music, doing these reductions and making these graphs, or you're doing set theory, so you're doing atonal music.
Mhm.
And I think that's not true anymore. Those areas kind of still have a huge hold on, uh, like the conversation. And like if you go to the annual, any of the big annual music theory conferences, you'll generally find plenty of sessions where people are working on that stuff and sharing their research. But the areas, I mean, and then I guess what I'm saying is that in uh, the the world now, there's like it's completely fragmented. It's kind of like asking like what are the main areas of metal right
Mhm.
now. There's not really, it's hard to tell a narrative where everything kind of hangs together.
For sure.
Um, but the areas that I'm kind of interested in are, obviously this rhythmic stuff. So it's particularly looking at the rhythm from a like an embodied perspective. So looking at what movement and embodied cognition have to do with how we might analyze rhythms. And um, yeah, so that's kind of there's, I mean, there's a long-ish history of rhythmic analysis, which has always been kind of overshadowed by the harmony stuff,
Mhm.
but it's been there. But kind of the exciting thing that's been happening recently is kind of bring this into conversation with how people actually move to music instead of thinking of stuff as just like abstract grids,
Mhm.
uh, and isolated time points and durations and stuff, thinking about how rhythm feels, how um yeah how your body can kind of know things about rhythm that your brain doesn't really know, how you can uh outsource aspects of rhythm to like different parts of your body.
Hmm.
And like there's one of the people who wrote his dissertation at Columbia a few years ago. He has a really cool dissertation. Galen DeGraff is his name. But he has a really cool dissertation about uh, like performing polymeters, and like this idea that there's a lot of literature about the brain that's kind of saying like, well, you can't pay attention to two different rhythms at the same time.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and his argument is kind of like, well, you don't have to pay attention to it. Like if your foot can do one thing and your hand can do another thing, like that clearly happens all the time for drummers and organists and other multi-limbed musicians. Um, so like that counts as some sort of cognition. Um, so yeah, I'd say that's kind of the main area I'm going in for the dissertation. Although I have the bad habit of trying to do everything. So like on the YouTube channel, I just do like a kind of random. I do some like really traditional harmony stuff. I do some kind of old fashioned rhythm stuff. I try to do some kind of more out there like edges of music theory stuff, like where the boundary between music theory and I don't know, music criticism or cultural uh, writing about music. Um, I've done a lot about form, so like looking at long term form in some of these prog bands. Um, yeah, so kind of maybe that's enough of an answer
For
for
sure.
now.
it seems like maybe like microtonal stuff is becoming a big thing. Like it might pass like, 4 or 5 guests have been microtonal people, and like that's never clicked for me because I'm just like I already bought a guitar and I don't want to buy another. But
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I guess when I was in school, there was definitely like a focus on harmony, and I feel like everybody glorified melody, but they couldn't really put any theory or analysis to it. Um, but yeah, it's also interesting that you say Schenkerian or set theory. Are you hip to like this neo-Riemannian or whatever?
Yeah. So that's the other that's another big area. I've done a little bit with that. I think it's cool. Uh yeah, this the like looking at I think it's cool because it one of the things that's a little annoying about Schenker uh is how hierarchical it is and how it's like the whole theory is based on there's like one chord that matters, the one chord, the tonic,
Hmm.
and everything else is subservient to it, um, which I think in a lot of music, starting with like 19th century, mid to late romantic stuff, it kind of stops making a whole lot of sense. So and there's a ton of metal stuff where uh, it's interesting. Yeah, so I talked about that a little bit in the Fantafaxis video I did uh, in the fall. Um, yeah, I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but it's I like that too. Yeah, so I mean, like there's that. There's also like jazz harmony has kind of become a big thing. I know you said you were a studio jazz
Hmm. Yeah, at
person.
USC.
Yeah. I played jazz guitar for a little bit. I'm not very good, but I took lessons for a while. So like that's another kind of cool, like pragmatic way of thinking about harmony, I think. Um, yeah.
I spoke to John Link, who is like an Elliott Carter, I guess, like affiliate, and I was curious, like talking to him, he like I wanted to see if he could attribute any sort of like particular pitch class sets to something that would like fit with death metal. And he was just uncomfortable with the idea of death metal, like he doesn't know it or listen to it. But I'm curious if your mind, just to like sort of talk a little bit of geeky shop, if your mind goes anywhere with like what sort of interval vectors or like pitch class sets would vibe with that versus say black metal, or like how do you think about that relating to genres?
That's a good question. I think the like 016 pitch class set
Mhm.
that's like you get that chord like voiced that so it would be like C sharp F sharp so you have it has both a minor second and a tritone in it. It's kind of like the maximally dissonant trichord. You hear that a lot in like dissonant death metal and mathcore um
Mhm.
to like this like the Dillinger escape plan chord like at the start of Prancer and uh you yeah I think I brought it up a little bit in like my Gorguts video and the ingurgitating oblivion video. As far as black metal, I don't know, it's hard to say. Like a lot of black metal is pretty triadic,
Yeah.
um but a lot of it's not. Like I've been the last couple of days I've been listening to a lot of Krallis, the new album, and then going back and listening to a lot of the older stuff. Which like that's all over the place. There's like the earlier stuff was pretty triadic. There's a lot of stuff that's kind of like very uh fourth C and fifth C.
Mhm.
Uh these kind of like open intervals. In the middle, there's plenty of stuff that's just like really angular, more chromatic. So yeah, I don't know so much about black metal, but
That's my sense as well, like sort of triadic with like a lot of parallel stuff. Um,
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
do you think about like, I mean, like, I guess like coming from some sort of, counterpoint background or whatever, you hear about like how, everything parallel is so bad, but like then, in our world, it's like, it's kind of expected. Do you have any thoughts on like parallelism?
Yeah. Yeah, one of the people, actually it was Galen DeGraff. I TA'd for him last year. I think it was him. But when he was teaching, so we were teaching theory 2 or theory 3, and he which is like very clear every time he brought it up. It's like parallel intervals are bad if you want to make the voices sound independent. Um, and in like for voice writing, often the goal is to make the voices sound independent so you can show off that there are four voices doing kind of independent things. Whereas in metal, it's often that's not really how like stuff isn't in kind of like a four voice texture.
Mhm.
Um, it's more about reinforcing these root motions and using these different chord colors on top of it to flesh stuff out, make it sound a certain way. Um, yeah, like I mean, like I think about like one of the first guitar riffs I learned, the Raining Blood riff, where it comes first, and then you play a string up, so it's just it's a parallel perfect fourth,
Mhm.
um, and uh, yeah, I think that's super metal. It's like it's not about adding a second voice necessarily. It's about kind of like making this one riff, this one line sound more evil.
Yeah, the whole evilness thing is interesting, and I'm not sure if you know Charlie Looker from Extra Life.
Yeah, yeah.
He has
I
a
mean, I
whole
haven't
thing.
met him, but
He has like a video where he talks about basically like coming to terms with evil, and I think when you try to represent evilness in intervals, it's kind of funny. So I'm
yeah,
like, to me, a perfect fourth, like I don't see what's so evil about it. But then like I feel like people are trying to poke holes in the whole tritone being evil thing now. Like
yeah,
Adam Neely did that video about how that's like kind of a myth. Do you have any
yeah,
take on that?
yeah. It's all contextual. It's all. I mean, I think like it's cool that he did that like historical thing. Um, but there is a certain sense in which it's been a myth so long that it's like it's become part of the culture.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I'm not one to I'm definitely not someone to say that there's some sort of like intrinsic property of an interval that'll make it sound a certain way.
Hmm.
It's all context. And that context is both like the music that's around it and like what you know about the band, how they dress, what their album cover looks like.
Right.
It's all going to shape how you hear something. Um, so yeah, I think the like you can make any interval sound evil or not evil. Um, yeah, I'm kind of a fan. I've been messing around in my own stuff a lot with uh doing the like major thirds world. So
Hmm.
doing major thirds and minor sixths. Um, I think those have a pretty uh to the extent that they kind of hint at like an augmented chord sound.
Hmm.
I think it has a cool sound. But yeah, there's lots of stuff. Obviously, like the Dillinger Escape Plan, there's an interview I got a lot of mileage out of where he's like talking about how they have some lines where they harmonize it with at a minor second, so they're just playing the same thing a fret apart. And it has this like really buzzy kind of dissonant sound.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, be an interesting project doing like a a survey of like parallel intervals in metal. I bet you could find pretty good examples for most of them.
Like evil empiricism.
Yeah,
Imagining the title of the essay.
yeah, yeah.
Um, have you done a video on Portal? I don't think
No,
I've
I
seen
haven't.
one.
Yeah,
I feel like they've made good use of that minor sixth evilness, and like I don't know how they do it, but their sound is so terrifying, and like I'm
yeah,
not one to attribute terrifyingness to intervals, but
yeah, yeah. They're also their stuff is just like so. I don't know. I've always like I like their music. Um, they're one of those bands that I've kind of been uh I don't know, maybe too lazy or too daunted to try to transcribe just because it's like it's so hard to hear.
yeah,
And that's kind
absolutely.
of the thing. It's like it's so murky, it's so claustrophobic, just like sound wise, it's hard to even tell what the guitar is doing.
Hmm.
So I'm sure I could figure it out if I spent some time on it, but add it to my endless list.
For sure. Um, in terms of like your reading and stuff, I'm curious how you curate that type of thing, and I'm assuming, like, I feel like maybe I'm willfully not seeing the points of access to this type of material, but like I assume that being in an institution, you have access to like, a bunch of stuff like at the library or whatever. But how do you curate your reading, and how would you curate it if you didn't have like an institution to, you know,
Yeah, that's a great question. It's such a shame, this whole system of uh like institutional access. I should say something that I think most academics would say, um, which is if there's something you want to read, like, and you don't have access to it, just send me a link. I'll download it and send it to you. Because I get this stuff on the library, and the authors of it don't get any money from it if you pay for it or whatever. It's
mm,
so I
it's
mean, unless
fucked
it's
up.
like a published book, but like a lot of this stuff happens in articles, in journals, and there's no reason to be paying for those really. So yeah, so there is, it's a weird world where um there's so much stuff that gets written, and it's so, I don't want to say like badly publicized, but um it's like unless you know the person personally and you like see them post about it, uh you're probably not going to hear about something, or unless you like happen to be flipping through the journal, or it's on some sort of list that you're watching.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, there's a ton of stuff that comes out, and like I stuff that I should have read and just like nobody knew about. People have worked, and that's the problem with this. Is like you have so many people doing this work, and it's uh pretty common that they just like never find each other,
Hmm.
and they would actually have a lot to say to each other. So as far as like curating what I'm reading, figuring out what I'm reading, a lot of I don't know, a lot of like academic work is just like building bibliographies, and like so one of my exams for PhD camp, um, as I call it, was putting together. We had like 4 topics, and we had to come up with a bibliography of like 20 or 30 sources for each, and then read them all and do answer essay questions about them. Um, so that's like that was one huge source of things. That was one summer I just kind of spent reading stuff. Um, yeah, most of it's word of mouth. And like once you kind of get plugged into something, especially if you find something recent that's been published, you look through that paper's bibliography, and you can normally kind of get plugged into this
Hmm.
network of things that people are reading. But yeah, something I've been meaning to do is like uh, I mean, I get this question a lot, or some version of this question a lot in comments and stuff. Is like, what book should I read? What should I be looking at? And uh, the answer I normally have is like, it's there. I've learned a lot more about this specific stuff from articles than books, because most of these people are young enough that they haven't published full books about it,
Hmm.
um, about the metal stuff at least. I mean, there's plenty of interesting other stuff. Um, but yeah, something I've been meaning to do is either a video about it, uh, or something, or maybe like a bibliography page, just like with a list of stuff to read for people who are looking to research this stuff. Um, yeah, another source, like when I first sent in that one article to try to get it published, I like got reviewer comments, and they said, you say that there hasn't been a lot of writing about metal, but you're actually wrong, there's been a ton. So that was that was useful to like get a list of a bunch of things to have to read for
Hmm.
that. um yeah, and the other way of answering the question is to say like the what I read right now is way too little, and it's very pragmatic. It's like, what is this thing I'm working on at this exact moment, and what do I have to read for that to be able to cite, um, and kind of help my ideas along. So uh, yeah, I don't read nearly as much as I should, but I feel like everyone feels like that.
For sure, yeah. um let's see here. I'm curious if you feel like there are any sort of like particularly ripe areas of research in theory right now, like if you were to like all of a sudden have like a bunch of people doing what you're doing and you were like gonna direct them to different areas, where would you point them?
That's a great question. I don't know. I feel like it would be great to have more transcription of like this really complicated stuff that isn't um that hasn't been transcribed. Like obviously there's a huge amount of like unbelievable amount of this stuff that has been transcribed. Like if you go on Ultimate Guitar and just look at like all the Gorgut songs that are on there that people have painstakingly sat at home and figured out.
Hmm.
Uh, it's like it's really amazing. And the fact that you can get all this stuff for free, or for pretty cheap,
Hmm.
um, with the getting Guitar Pro or subscribing to Ultimate Guitars thing. Um, so, uh, but yeah, there's tons of bands like the kind of slightly less famous bands where I feel like there's just like having transcriptions of all that stuff would lead to a lot of really interesting stuff. Um, and the other thing that I'm going to be doing a little bit for my dissertation, but I'd be really excited to see more about is like these kind of um I like collecting documents of people's compositions, like or rehearsal documents, like videos of bands rehearsing, or uh the scratch files they share with
Mm.
each other, or the things they write down to figure out how to learn a song, um or the stuff they say to each other to try to explain like how to play something,
Hmm.
um which like I think that's like a huge black hole, uh or black box, I guess, right now, um in this scholarship, is like the really like nitty gritty, because like being in a band, like there's all sorts of stuff that goes on. Like for the little bit when my metal band was an actual multi-person band, um I'd like having to explain like what's happening here in this riff and how to think about this rhythm and whatever. And I feel like there's a whole lot of like really interesting knowledge there that's not in like the language of official music theory, but
Right.
it has it kind of gets at different important things that are overlooked when you just look at the finished product. Um, so I guess that's another thing. Those are kind of like maybe more like ethnographic,
Hmm.
uh, ethnomusicological things to do. Um, as far as music theory of metal, uh, I don't know. There hasn't actually been a ton about harmony. There's been a fair amount about rhythm, um, and there's been some really good stuff about form recently. Uh, but um, yeah, there's still not a whole lot about harmony, which I don't think I'm going to be the person to do that. But
Hmm.
that's another area where it could be interesting.
Do you feel like I feel like a lot of the music theory that seems to be going on is like basically analysis, and I'm curious, is your goal with this type of stuff to like show why something is good, or just show what somebody's doing? Because like, showing why what somebody's doing might not show why it's good necessarily, like why there's value to it. But I don't know, like I feel like some of this is trying to explain why something works.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think there's it's an interesting question and a really complicated question, because I'm gonna say no, I'm never trying to like prove that something is good. That's not
Hmm.
something you can prove,
Right.
because how good something is it's a relation between you listening to something and the sound. It's not like something that just exists in the sound itself. Um, but at the same time, I feel like it's kind of implicit in everything I do. Like if I'm writing about something, it's probably something I like, or at least something I like enough to want to spend the time to write about it, or talk about it, make a video about it, whatever, learn to play it. So it's like there is still, that's still like part of it. But I think it is kind of like a common, um, yeah, I think a way that one of my advisors put it, the same one who told me about how grad school exists, um, was he said music theory is a way of not taking things for granted. So like listening to like what's actually happening, because it's really easy to listen to something and just like not get any of it, not pay attention to it, not like care about what's changing, what's going on. So it's kind of like I think of it as like a way of being getting closer to the music, and it is like a way of caring about the music, and uh, trying to show other people why you like it or what you like about it, or at least just like finding a way to spend more time with music you like.
Mhm.
um yeah, I hope that
Yeah, I
answers
think
it a
so.
little bit.
It was an ill-formed question to start with, but yeah.
No, it's, I mean, like I said, it's a really really good question that I ask myself very often.
Hmm. I guess it's kind of like those how things work books where it's, like trying to explain how something works, like the mechanics of it, looking under the hood and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Um, yeah. So something I've been talking to a few people about in the metal world is like this idea of technicality, and like like there's like tech death, there's technical brutal death metal, and at a certain point, like I feel like this word doesn't help anymore because like, are you saying that it's complicated, or are you saying that it's like difficult to play? And so like, I don't know, it seems like at one point maybe technical meant like, oh, it's very flashy and impressive, but then it became like you're looking at stuff where it's like the car bomb stuff, it's like that's not too difficult in the sense of like you have to play really fast. It's like it's very conceptually difficult, and
yeah.
a lot of like coordination and stuff. So like what's your relation with the word technical, and do you feel like there would be a better word for it?
Yeah, that's another really good question. And it's actually something uh I have another article coming out in March, where I get into this a little bit. And what I Yeah, so you're absolutely right that it's kind of this, like so many words about music, if you look at it a little bit closely, it starts to look really weird. But we're just like so used to using it, and um it's you're not used to maybe looking uh critically at these sorts of words. But I think, yeah, I mean, like it's there's something like, I don't know, there's a few directions. Like you said, there's the technique aspect. So like technical as in requiring really advanced technique, which I think of, like Necrophagist, or I guess Archspire, or these other bands that it's like it's kind of like an athletic achievement to be able to play this stuff because it's so fast. It makes your hand do all these weird things. Then there's also technical in the sense, like you said, like conceptual difficulty, which Adam Neely has the video kind of about this. It's about virtuosity, or it's about like, it's called like the hardest music to play or something. But he like
The
makes
Ben Johnson thing, or
yeah, that's the one he decides is the hardest music to play, the most difficult music in the world. Um, but yeah, so like conceptual stuff. So car bomb stuff, where it's hard to play because you have to think of time in a really different way, or you have to develop this sensitivity to time that's really different. I also think of technical as like technical in the sense of like uh scientific, or like um yeah, maybe that's the word, like clinical, like, so there's something kind of like very sterile, which normally you say to mean it's as like a bad thing. You say like, oh, that's bad music, it's sterile. as opposed to, organic emotional music. But I think there's a aesthetic value in either. People like both, and the same person can like both at different times. So I think there's an aspect of that too, where it's like it's very on the it's very on the grid. It's very like chopped up and assembled in these kind of uh, labyrinthine ways. Yeah, and then the idea that I this article is about is this idea of structural density, um, which uh, is basically it's like how easy it is to wrap your head around something. So like this is about the article is about the anomalous album Omnivalent. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Mhm.
It's kind of like this underground tech death album from 2007, 2005, somewhere in there. But this it's just like it's like cryptopsy and ion dissonance and gorguts on speed and all smashed together. And I like there are a few bands who are kind of in this zone. But it's just like stuff happens so quickly and they don't repeat anything, and it's just like such a blur, that it's really hard to wrap your head around. Whereas like if you have something that is very like repetitive riffs, there's stuff happening in a predictable way, it's a different thing, even if it's the same tempo, same stuff, same like difficulty to play, or whatever. So yeah, that's another aspect of this that I think is wrapped up in this technical death metal stuff. Yeah.
That makes sense. Like, yeah, in terms of form, like how complex is the story that you're telling in some ways, I guess.
Yeah, how much information are you getting per second? Like, are you getting the same riff over and over and it's really fast, or are you getting a million new riffs, and you can't like settle on any of them roughly?
Yeah. And it's funny with that type of arms race, it's like at a certain point is there diminishing returns, and at what point is there diminishing returns? Because like like a band like Incenithrac, like when I realized that it was improvised, I was kind of like, oh fuck, like I love it, but I like and I love all those guys, but like I feel like I lost something from it, like realizing that so much of it was improvised.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I don't know, I guess like knowing that there's that much coordination affects the aesthetic somehow, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something like it's fun. I feel like there's a lot of metal fans, uh at least I did. You kind of get into it partly in the early days because uh you like seeing guitar heroes do really flashy things, right?
Mhm.
Um I love the Dragon Force stuff when they were really big, and just like the idea of like people doing something that is really hard to do and it's impressive, uh and no one else can do, maybe the same way you like watch the Olympics or whatever,
Mhm.
uh, to like see the limits of human achievement. um so yeah, I think there is this idea that just like virtuosity is fun for its own sake, to watch.
You said you're a lifting coach, right?
Yeah.
Has that influenced how you think about this type of stuff at all? Because I mean, like, I feel like to get that type of performance, you have to have that mindset.
Yeah. Maybe it's funny. I don't like I've never been as like rigorous with my guitar playing as I am with the lifting stuff.
Mhm.
Um, which is maybe a shame. But like I don't know. I don't know if there's really any crossover there. There probably is. I think maybe my fascination with movement in music and in lifting is kind of it crosses over. But um yeah,
Gotcha.
other than that, I'm not sure.
So I know that you're interested a lot in transcription, and when I was in school, like I feel like everybody was like, you need to transcribe, but if you use like a slow down tool, like if you do any of that, if you like don't learn to sing at first, like, and the jazz people have all these conservative rules, but I imagine in metal it's kind of like, yeah, I'm gonna slow it down and like
Yeah.
quantize it and see.
Yeah.
Is there a tool set that you like, a toolkit that you use of any software that you'd point people towards?
Yeah. I use I think it's the jazz people use it too. It's Transcribe is
Okay.
the software with the exclamation point. Um yeah, I use that mostly. And then I use Dorico for my notation stuff. Because I found it's a little more flexible for the putting in the crazy metal rhythmic stuff. And I just like the workflow a little more. But yeah, but I'm for the metal stuff, because the problem with transcribing metal stuff is normally not uh for me, it's not so much like melody or pitch. It's like it's even hearing what the notes are, like, if
Yeah,
that makes sense. It's like it's
totally.
timbral, it's separating these really muddy guitars uh from the drums, and being able to hear, like, especially the really down tuned, like uh chugging stuff, and the stuff when there's like it's being masked by the vocals and the cymbals, and everything is as loud as possible. Yeah, so I do uh Transcribe, which has like I listen to a lot of stuff slow, and I uh I filter stuff a lot, so like being able to hear the bass, I move everything up an octave.
Interesting.
um I put EQ on it sometimes to try and like piece out little bits of it. um yeah, I'm like I'm always trying to work on my ear training and doing the like singing stuff. But with metal, so often too, the metal stuff is not singable.
Right.
Like, it's these huge intervals, it's really angular. So it's a little different than transcribing guitar solos, or I mean jazz solos of any type, which I've done a little bit of that, and I had to do for jazz stuff. But and for that, yeah, like I took a class on jazz transcription here in my first semester at Columbia, and we had the same. It was like every week there was a different thing, and one of them was like we had to learn to sing the whole solo first before we wrote anything down or tried it on our instrument, and we had to like sing it, go into the room. He gave us the first note. We had to sing the whole solo, and then we would go back and write it down. Which that was my worst nightmare. I'm horrible at singing. Um, but yeah, which I think all that stuff is useful. I think it's really useful if you're improvising in a tonal setting in jazz. Like, yeah, you need to get that stuff into your so deep into your brain that it's not just like your fingers doing it. It's you can actually really hear it. But yeah, for transcribing the metal stuff, especially since I a lot of times when I'm transcribing stuff, I don't actually learn to play it.
Mhm.
That would just slow me down a lot, because it's like really hard to play. So I'm just like trying to get the notes down and move on, and then later I go back and learn to play it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I assume that for what you're doing, like I feel like, these days, like whenever I'm like listening to something, I'm like, well, I figure out how to turn this into content. I gotta write a review of it or whatever. Like if nothing else, to just like keep me more deeply engaged with it. So I'm curious, since you're probably doing that more so, how do you approach listening? Like, both in terms of like finding what to listen to, and like how much, like how focused are you when you listen to it? What sort of process is that like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, I feel a little bit like I have, at least right now, I have like a huge backlog of stuff that uh it's gonna take, because it takes so much more time to like, I feel like ideas are kind of cheap, and it's the actually like turning it into a
Right.
thing. At least for me, like I have a huge list of things where it's like, wouldn't it be cool if I did something about this riff? Uh, so it's like I have no shortage of that. And a lot of them I even have like a starting idea. It's the like all the steps between that and putting a video up, or God forbid, writing a paper presentation or an article or something. Um, it's like this article that I'm publishing in March. The first draft of this I finished writing in 2019. So it's been, 3 full years of revisions and coming back to it and adding more to it, and sending it in and getting rejected and sending it back and getting revisions to do. And so yeah, and then even for the videos, it's like, I have my idea, and then it's like, well, shit, I have to transcribe it, I have to write a script, I have to learn to play it, I have to record all this stuff, I have to edit it. So yeah, so I guess when I'm listening, I'm not normally or as far as like the content for the YouTube videos and stuff, I'm kind of coasting off of all the listening I've done for the rest of my life.
Right.
I don't feel that same pressure to write about new stuff, which I guess it would be different if I was writing reviews or stuff, which
Right.
I did for a little bit back in the day. But yeah, as far as finding new stuff to listen to, I'm trying to stay plugged in. I'm trying to fight against uh the like stereotype of your listening freezes at a certain point and you just stop listening to new stuff. So I have a few places I go to look for like new stuff to listen to. The machine music blog, I don't know if you know it.
Mm-mm.
But he does a really nice like 5 things you should listen to every week, which I found a lot of good stuff from. So yeah, I'm just like trying to, and I'm also kind of, now that I have my dissertation project in the works, I'm always like listening for examples of things. And also because for teaching too, I'm always listening for things that would be good to teach certain theory concepts. But yeah, I don't know, I do all sorts of listening. I do a lot of listening where I turn it on and I don't remember a single thing because I was paying attention to something else. And I also sometimes I have stuff where I try to like put something on, close my eyes, just listen and pay attention. But I don't have as much time for that sort of listening as I used to. And like I think a lot of the listening I do at this point turns into transcribing and learning to play something. Like I consider that kind of part of the process of
For sure.
deeper listening.
For me, like I feel like I read Toilet of Hell and Invisible Oranges on occasion. Are there any other blogs or sources like that, like the machine music that you mentioned? Any other blogs you'd suggest?
Yeah, I read those sometimes. I like Treble Zine has good stuff I found. Or their kind of tastes are aligned with mine. It's like the Tech Death Tuesday thing on Metal Injection is fun. I found some good stuff on there. There's the also on Metal Injection, the Obituarist, Trevor. I don't know how to say his name. The Black Dahlia murder guy.
Gotcha.
He does like a survey of really underground metal. Yeah, and then a lot of it is, I go to shows and I see an opener who I've never seen and I like get into their stuff or whatever. Yeah, but I'm not nearly as plugged into new stuff as I would like to be, and or as a lot of people doing this sort of thing are.
I don't know if you're familiar with the YouTube channel Score Follower.
No.
I just came across it like 2 days ago, and it's addictive because it's just like scores that, like I'm sure you've seen those types of videos where it's like a score of Xenakis or whatever, and you're like, oh cool, I get to follow along. But
Yeah.
it's interesting because they like called for all this music, and I've seen so much wacky stuff where it's like everybody has a beautiful score for something, and even if it's the wackiest music, but I don't know, like what, like, do you feel like the score is becoming more or less essential in metal? Like, it seems like a lot of the Krallis guys communicate all their stuff orally, and then it appears maybe as a transcription. But then other people, it's like for me, for instance, everything that I do is like mapped out in a spreadsheet that it goes into Guitar Pro. And
Yeah, yeah.
what do you think the deal is with the score in metal these days?
It's a good question. Like I think, um, and that's like the sort of question where that I really want to figure out, because my feeling is that there are some bands that have like really detailed tabs or scores that they share with each other. Um, like I was talking to Kate from Pupil Slicer, and she sent me a bunch of their like rehearsal Guitar Pro files. Um, whereas like talking to Max from Anomalous for this article, he like they just like did it all in the studio. They didn't really have a score going in. They would like go and noodle, or I mean, I guess they did it as a demo first and then they recorded it in the studio, but like they just do it all by recording. And then like the Car Bomb guys do like I'm pretty sure they share MIDI with each other, or they like make MIDI demos and learn from those. Although I want to talk to them a lot more. And then like on the other end, you have the Sheet Happens company,
Mm-hmm.
where they like some of these bands like Animals as Leaders and Between the Buried and Me and these other mostly prog bands, they sell these like beautiful, huge, polished tab books. And I feel like that's kind of, it's becoming more and more something that people want and care about, uh, like being able to look through the tab as it's going, just to like make sense of it, or be like, man, that's even more complicated than I thought, or to actually learn to play it. Um, so yeah, I think we're going to see more and more of it, but I don't really know. It is a lot of work for bands to get it together if they don't already learn from a score
Mm-hmm.
and share it with each other. Um, yeah, but there's I mean there's tons of different types of notation, and um, like you said, you've got your spreadsheets, and it was really fun to look through that and listen to your stuff. I'm a big fan. I love this like really kind of obtuse, busy, like heavy stuff.
Mm-hmm. um with like tabs and stuff, like I feel like I mentioned something about tabs to a friend and he sort of scoffed at me. And at the same time I'm like, back in the day when I was just using Sibelius, if you see like metal and Sibelius, it's like, oh god, fuck,
Yeah,
like this is so awful looking. Because like
yeah,
I mean, like with anything that chromatic, it's like
yeah.
do you think that like tabs are a better option? Like I feel like they're more elegant in many ways, but like maybe a piano roll, like how, I don't know, it seems like there's something too cumbersome about standard notation.
Yeah, I think I mean just like dealing with the octaves and ledger lines in standard notation, like you have this stuff where if you're playing on an 8 string or whatever, it's like you're way below the staff, and then you're like, but you can't just like move everything down 2 octaves, because you're also like transcribing any Meshuggah stuff. It's like jumping like 2 or 3 octaves at a time. Not to mention all the enharmonic stuff, and the like the weirdness of the how you would try to spell everything, and um how there's only like one good solution for fingering this metal stuff. So like why not just give that? Yeah, I'm a huge fan of tabs. A lot of it's just like I mean I'm a typical caveman guitarist where I learned tabs a long time before I learned standard notation. And I for a while I was diligent practicing my sight reading with standard notation, but I'm still so much better at tabs. Um, and yeah, I think there's also there's just like so much stuff specific to metal that makes so much more sense in tabs
Mhm.
on guitar. Uh, yeah, so I like when I transcribe, I do it to standard notation because I normally am not like paying attention to how I would actually finger something or
Interesting.
whatever. But if I'm ever gonna play it, I will put it in tabs normally, unless it's like super simple.
Do you find that there's any sort of pushback about tabs in your work like at Columbia? Like, does any professor say like, no, you got to do this, or
Um, I don't know. I've
not to
never
throw them under
tried
the
to.
bus, but
I've never. No, I mean, I don't think I've ever tried to like publish tabs. I just always put stuff in standard notation if it's going to be like an example in a paper or whatever. Um, but maybe I should. I mean, and some people do put tabs and notation. Um, and I don't think anyone would. I think people would care if I put only tabs with no rhythm,
mm,
because the assumption is that most of your audience are going to be people who know music theory but don't necessarily know anything about metal if you're presenting at a conference or publishing in a journal or whatever. Um, so uh, yeah, and tabs really are only guitarists can really make use of them. Um, so yeah, it's an interesting question. I have a lot of like unfinished thoughts and projects about tabs and standard notation and
mhm,
copyright and transcription and notation softwares and all that, which is going to be some sort of project about at some point,
for sure.
or several projects.
Well, we're up here at an hour, so I'll let you get going. Do you have anything? I mean, like your YouTube channel is Metal Music Theory. You got your homepage. I'll link all that stuff in the notes. Anything else you want to like mention
Yeah,
or?
no, I'm I'm pretty content with how famous I am, which is not very famous. So I'm things are going well. I'm uh yeah, I don't know if that sounds conceited or whatever. But I'm not uh not too worried about trying to advertise more stuff.
For sure.
Oh yeah, you follow me on social media if you want like up to date stuff. But yeah.
Real quick, do you ever cross paths with George Lewis while you're around campus?
Yeah, on I mean I know him. I don't know if he knows my name. If you pop quizzed him, I've talked to him once or twice. Yeah, but he's a giant of scholarship, music scholarship performance. Yeah, the very first day I was here for like our orientation, I found myself in an elevator with him, and he was very nice. He politely asked what I was doing, and I was like, metal stuff.
I'm sure you
Yeah.
handled it better than I would have. So
I don't know.
cool. Well, Calder, thanks for talking to me. I'll talk to you in the future, and you're always
Yeah.
welcome to come back and chat about whatever you got going on. So,
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been great. I'm a huge fan of your stuff, your this podcast. You've got some really great guests. Um, and yeah, thanks so much for having me.
yeah, my pleasure.
Good to meet.
Talk to you later, man. Peace.
Yeah, yeah.